Hi guys, welcome back to the second tutorial about the Blender 2.9 Compositor. My name is Helge from pixeltrain. In this series, Blender for Production, we've started with the overview over the workflow between the 3D environment of Blender and the Compositor. And I hope you've seen the first tutorial so you understand how these connections are. And exactly at the point where we ended the first tutorial, I now want to come into the Compositor again and work with the same plate here. And in this tutorial, I want to talk with you about the typical things you normally do in a node-based compositor. We talk about the viewers, about comping different streams and sizes. We talk about denoising, masking and rotoscoping, working with Cryptomattes, Object and Material-IDs, and also a little bit of effects. So it's not a complete introduction of compositing of a special image. It's more about finding your way around in this compositing environment and also understanding how Blender works in these areas. And one of the things which I had as a question after my first tutorial about the Blender Compositor is how I see this compositing solution against compositing solutions like, for example, Nuke or Fusion. I have to confess, I'm a trainer for Nuke and I'm a really big fan of Nuke. So if I do VFX work from Houdini or Maya, I comp my stuff in Nuke X because that's the compositor where I live and that's the way of compositing which I used to think of. But the Blender Compositor here has many advantages, and so I want to use some seconds here to talk with you about the pros and cons of this compositor in conjunction to other solutions which you maybe have in your studio. Let's start fair enough with the cons. So this compositor here inside of Blender is not very optimized in the sense of caching. So every frame is always calculated, and if you only switch here the focus between frames, you will see that this compositor always caches the things again. So this is a really annoying thing if you come from other applications which cache a lot better. And I also am aware that there is a Blender fork guys working on a better caching system inside of the compositor, and I wait for it really hard. So it's not there yet. So my solution for this is I really often go into my render settings here, and then I render, for example, my plate in 50% or only 25%. And the cool thing is you can then start comping here, and if you have finished your work, you can go back into the resolution, crank it up to 100% and press render. And because of the nice integration which I showed in the first tutorial, you get a final comp after the rendering for a still, but also for a whole animation. So I work with a proxy resolution sometimes. Another thing which I find a little bit, not so optimized at the moment is that we don't have many on-screen widgets for helping stuff. I talked about that we have this sunbeams here, this node, and if you want to use the on-screen widgets here, for example, for the center here, I have to hook it up so that you see the result of that. You have to use here, let's give a little bit of ray length, 0.1 for example. You have to use here the backdrop, which I don't like too much. I mostly work here with the image viewer, and then you have to work here in this thing here. So many of the nodes where I would prefer to have an on-screen widget have no widget at all, or you have to switch to the backdrop. So this is something which I would like to have in the future, but that's it. Let's talk about the pros of this compositing, and the biggest pro I have for this compositor is the extremely fast integrated workflow between the 3D scene, which I have open at the same time if I like. If I'm not the artist of this scene, I can reference this scene into this environment and I can see everything what's going on. I also can make changes if I want to do that, and I have at the same time my compositing open, and every time I click here, for example, re-render this render layer, I get the new scene, all the data is there, and I can really see what's happening in compositing. So instead of going here into the layout, switching on here cycles, seeing something like that, and then thinking, okay, what's happening now in the compositing? Okay, there's a glow or whatever. I can really work at the same time in both worlds. So this is something I love. It's really cool. I can fast iterate through my ideas. I also use the 2D and 3D tracking environment of Blender. Blender has a really powerful 2D and 3D tracking environment, and it's integrated completely into this compositor. So you use the data from there, and we will have a small look into this idea in this tutorial. But in a later tutorial, I will talk about 2D and 3D tracking, rotoscoping, and things like that. So these are some ideas here. Let's now start with our comping work here. And the first question is how to get stuff into the system. So I showed a little bit of that in the last tutorial, but what you also can do now here, the render layers is the output here of our render layer, which we have. If you have rendered more than one layer here, remember view layers is the same like render layers inside of Maya, for example. You can add more than one render layer node here. So Shift A, go here to inputs, set a render layer here, or use Shift D to duplicate this render layer. And if you have a different render layer, you can now select here the second one. So you have more than one render layer input here. And a little word here, also a pro for this compositor is Blender can work with more than one scene at the same time. You see here the scenes drop down. And you see that in every render layer here is also a scene. So you can work with more than one scene at the same time in the 3D environment. I reference in normally external scenes into these scenes here. You render them at the same time and comp them at the same time. Really, really powerful. So a render layers node is really cool for that. But you also can import external files. So what you can do is I switch now here my viewer. And then I go here into the editor types and I switch here over to file browser, for example. And now I have my file browser here. Little tip, if you want to go full screen first because you want to work here on your hard drive, Control spacebar makes every window over which you hover here full screen. Then I go here into my project folder, into assets, for example. Here I see my files. I can switch here now to thumbnails to see what's going on here. And you see there's a movie here, some EXRs for foreground and background plate, and a text overlay as an EXR and a PNG. And what I can do now here is I take, for example, now an EXR, which I rendered out. Let's take this foreground plate here, and then I drag it over into the compositing world. And because that here is a multi-channel EXR, I see all the channels here. And this also works for plates which are not rendered in Blender. So this is standard. You always get multi-XRs with all your ports here inside of this compositor. Nice thing. If you want to have now, for example, this PNG, select this, drag it over, and you see it looks different because we only have here these three information here. So let's get rid here of this one. And let's talk here about the text overlay PNG here. So I have Node Wrangler installed, so I can Control-Shift-Click here to make this here into the screen. And what you see here now is we have this text here. We can show here the text in our viewport. And I switch on the alpha here in the viewer so that you can see, okay, there's also an alpha channel. If you import something and you are used to work with Fusion or Nuke or so, you know that you have to configure how this input plate fits into your pipeline of the compositing. And one thing you always have to keep in mind is the color space, and the other one is the alpha channel. So let's talk about this briefly. If you take this PNG here and you open your N menu here on the right side, I said I have the N menu open most of the time. I'm here in the Item tab and I've opened the properties here. You always see the properties of the node which you selected. And if you go here now to your imported PNG, you see we have a whole bunch of options here. One thing is you can switch here the source, that it's not a single image, it's an image sequence, it's a movie. You can change these things here. You see here the path and the size, which is really important. You will see that in a moment. And then you have here the color space, and you can switch here now your color space around, and this PNG is sRGB, that's right, but you can switch it. So if you go here to linear, for example, you see now you have a linear interpretation of the whole thing. And yeah, you also have filmic, log, raw, whatever you want to use. And here is the alpha channel, which you want to have. And the alpha channel here is at the moment on straight, which is correct for PNG. Most 3D renderers, if you render them out, they are pre-multiplied. So if you have then, for example, pre-multiplied alpha, you can switch this here if you need that, and then you get the right interpretation of the alpha channel. But in a PNG, it's splitted here, so that's the correct interpretation for this point here. So these are ways of getting stuff into this area. And the next thing we normally do inside of a compositing is we want to work with viewers. Now, let's talk about the viewer here. So if you ever get rid of a viewer and you want to have one back, Shift A, output here is the viewer node, or you can, if you have installed the node wrangler, click Shift Control somewhere and then you get a new viewer, sometimes a little bit off screen. So let's bring it back. Let's talk about this viewer really fast. You see this viewer here uses the alpha, that's good for my case, and it shows what you pipe into that. And what I do in many of my projects, let's get rid of this window here, is that I have more than one viewer open at the same time, because you want to see, for example, different results from different points in your composite. So let's add another viewer here. Let's go to input and, output, another viewer. And this viewer here should show, for example, this text overlay here, which we had. And you see that we still see here the output of this stream here, because this viewer is active. You see this red bar here, and this viewer is grayed out, so we don't see it. If you click now another viewer here, you switch now which viewer is active. And you also see that Blender has no problem in working with plates with different sizes. So if you press the N key here over your image editor, go here to image, you see this plate here is smaller than this plate here. Yeah, so we can work at the same time here, and you combine the streams later and you have to decide which is the size you need to have. We will talk about that in a moment, but you see this viewer here is always active if you click it. If you want to color your viewers because you want to help yourself, you can activate a viewer, go here into the options. Under label, you can say, for example, this is the text stream. And yeah. And then you can go here to color, tick this and say this is green. And now you see it's renamed. You see it better in big trees. And so you can have more than one viewer at the same time. Let's get rid of this because I want to compare now two streams. For this, we have a really special viewer, which is named the split viewer. And the split viewer has two inputs. So hook them up, number 1, number 2, and make it active. And now you see here, get rid of that here, that we have now both plates at the same time here. We have here a factor, which we can use to show now different areas here of the split, and we can switch the split here around. So if you want to compare something, this split viewer here is a really good helper for that. So now we have these two plates. We have learned that this plate is too small, you see it here, and we want to combine now these two worlds. So let's get rid here a little bit of stuff, and now we want to combine these two. For this we have two nodes normally. We have an alpha over node and we have a mix node. So let's talk about both here. We go here to color, this is alpha over, and we go here to color again, and here's the mix node. You remember that in the first tutorial I added quick favorites, so in most of this work I normally only press the Q key here, and you see here my both quick favorites, which I can use here directly to add these nodes. But I think it's important for you that you know where they live. So the mix node here is like in Photoshop 2 layers. You have 2 layer inputs here. You have a factor where you can say how transparent or how these 2 layers mix. And then we have a mix mode, same like in Photoshop. Let's use this here first, so only that you understand how it works. Important thing is that this node is read from top down. So in opposite of Photoshop, where something which is on the bottom is the background and then you stack it up, here inside of this system, the first input here is the background. And then you bring something into that stream. So hold this metaphor, you bring something into the stream and you mix it into that here. And if you now take a look here, you see, yeah, this stream here, the text wins. But now we know oh, there's an alpha channel, but what I've said, it's a straight alpha. It's not pre-multiplied, so you don't have a hole in this plate here at the moment. And to activate that, you can click here this little icon. You see this is alpha. Include alpha of the second input into this operation. And so you get this here as a result. Now the text is over that here. And now you can use the factor here, for example, to mix these two and say how much you want to have. Or you can open up here and use a different mode, for example, lighten or whatever you want to use here. So this is typical mixing of stuff. Let's get rid of that. And we talk about alpha over, which is the more typical node inside of this Blender Compositor to mix such things. So again, nodes, input. So first one is the background. Second one is the overlay. Then we want to see what's going on, and you see now it's directly doing its job. But if you now take a really close look, you see, ooh, this looks terrible. The reason for this is, again, the idea of the straight alpha. This is a straight alpha, so we have to multiply this now with the background, and this is done here with convert premult. And now you see you get a nice result here. So alpha over is a node which we use all the time for mixing stuff. And you also have a factor here if you like and if you need that. Okay, let's talk now a little bit more about bringing these two plates together, because you see that the plates don't match. First question is, where is the final size of a composite? We talked about that Blender can work with any plate sizes here. So this plate here, if you select this, is full HD. This here is smaller. The fixed plate size is later here in the composite node. So you remember that we deliver everything out through the composite node. And if I want to hook it up and you have the node wrangler, you can hook this up to a node by pressing the O key, like output on your keyboard. And now this here is delivered if you render into the composite here. And this size here is now the size which you set here in your scene settings. So this would be full HD. But until this point, you can work in every size as you like. And if you save out the stream directly, you get the size of the stream. And every node takes its size from the background, so from this input here, which is in the front here inside of the Blender Compositor. So that's the background here. Control right mouse button, drag here to cut this off. And now we want to have the text in the correct size. So let's go back here to the text overlay. And I press the N key only to show you now the plate size. It's 1280 to 720. If you want to resize a plate, we can now go into our nodes. And there's a whole section here with Distortion Notes. And here we find all kinds of distortions. We can scale, we want to do in a moment, we can rotate, we can flip them, we can crop them. We have things like corner pin and so on, transform and translate. So everything which you normally need, rotate. We take a scale node here, and if you want to add something to a stream, hover over the stream where you want to place it. And then I click here, and now it's inside of this stream. So let's take now a look here. And you see the scale here works with a percentage here. 1 means original size. And here are some tips working with these fields. If you click here and drag, I think you know that you scale it then with this slider here. If it's too fast, you can hold down the Shift key inside of Blender, so it slows everything down. What you also can do is you can click inside of that and type something, if you like. And another thing is you can connect these fields. You do that by hovering over the first one. Now hold down your mouse and drag here. Now both are selected. You see that it highlights black here. Let's do it again. And then if I release, both fields are open at the same time. And if I type now 2, for example, you see they are connected. Enter. Now everything is twice as large. You can do the same with slider. So I will start here, drag over, and then left and right. Yeah, and then Shift also to do that here. So it takes a little bit of practice, but it works fine. So what we want in our case is not that we do it here by hand. So I want to reset the node, little tip here, select the node and use your backspace key on the keyboard. You remember deleting is X here. So backspace is reset for a node. Nice. So this node is back now to original. Then I go here into this drop down, and now you can select the scene size or the render size. In my case, I want to use the render size, and now the plate is full HD. Great. So we have done our job here. If you want to close this node so that it doesn't take so much space, you can press the H key, like hide, if you like. You see then a node collapse. And there are some more keyboard shortcuts which are H-based, so let's talk about that. You see here this little preview here, which is nice if you want to understand what's going on. But if you know what's going on, you don't need the preview. So select this node here. H brings everything down here. If you press Shift H, you only remove the preview or toggle the preview. And another thing which is really important, for example, if you have more than one port here at the output and you don't need them at all, you can select a node here and Control H. And every port which is not used is then gone. And the same here. If you don't need all these ports here, select this Control H and you only see the ports which you have used. So some H tricks. I go here, Shift H to remove that here. So it's nicer. Then I take this node H again, and now we have that here, and then we can set our viewer here again to this one here. Great. So now we have talked about the scale node, and we also talked about the different transform modes which we have inside of this distortion menu here. And the next thing we want to talk about is the first thing where we want to use all these channels here. So let's try, for example, a denoising workflow. Let's do that here. Make a little bit of space here. Bring it to the right. And the next thing we now need is a filter node. Under filter, you see all kinds of effects and filters. We have used the glare node before. Now we go here to the denoise node. And you see the denoise node has 3 inputs, and it's a wrapper for the Intel Open Image Denoiser. Since Blender 2.9, which version do we have? Yeah, Blender 2.9, we can use the Intel Denoiser directly in rendering. I've rendered this out without the denoiser to show you how this here works. So we can hook up directly the image here and now make this bigger. And one thing you will see here is that this image here is really noisy. That's okay for now, so a good practice. And another thing is that if you have a node which takes a longer time to process, you will see on the right side here of your status bar that there's a progress bar going. So if you have the feeling that something doesn't happen, look into the right bottom of your screen, then the process bar is maybe running. So let's Control-Shift-Click here on the denoising, and you see now this node runs, and this here is the result. So let's compare this with before. So if you use now here this node, select it, press the M key like mute, you see now this is without the denoising, and M again. This is with the denoiser. It takes a while. Now you see noise is gone. But this AI magic which now happened can be better if you help the system a little bit. And for this, we've activated the denoising passes here. I've done this by going here to the view layer properties, and here we have all the passes which are on this view layer. And here is a pass, denoising data, and this here delivers all the passes this denoiser needs. So if you haven't activated that, tick this, but don't forget, if you now tick this, you have to re-render. You can re-render here by this little button, and then these passes are filled with data, and then we can use them. So what we now can do is we hook this up a little bit different. We first say we want to use the noisy image here. Then we also want to use the denoising normals and the denoising albedo. Some people are discussing, do you want to use here the noisy image or the image here? It depends. I've tested both, and normally I go here with the noisy image, but yeah, I don't think that there's a rule. And now you see this is the result now, and it looks much better now here. So this is the denoising workflow. And if you now have the feeling that it takes too long now to process all the time while you are working, you can do one of two things. You can mute this node, work with all the other stuff, and at the end, before you render your final image, unmute it again, and then you wait. and then on the render farm or overnight, the whole animation is rendered, denoised at the same time. That's the big advantage of this fast integration inside of Blender. Or what you can do is you go here to your nodes and take a file output node, then you hook this up here and say, yeah, I want to save out this still here now as a denoised one. So you go here into the properties of that, go into the path. This is our normal still. So we say this is the still denoised. Let's save it out as EXR. Make your settings RGBA, float. If you have more passes which you want to add here, you can make more inputs here and hook them up. We've talked about this in the first tutorial. And then you can render out the whole thing here. So what you normally then do is you go here to render and trigger it for this image or for the whole animation, and then everything is saved out. And if you have an animation, don't forget, only to show you, to add your pound signs here so that these are filled then with the frame numbers and you don't overwrite your file all the time. So that would be a workflow if you like that. Let's go back here. If you want to delete something without breaking the stream, we've talked about this, Control X. And so we have now the stream still intact. And what I now want to do is in the next step, we want to talk about another typical work you have to do inside of compositing, working with masks or mattes. How to do that in the Blender Compositor. So if you go here into Shift A again to your nodes, you see that we have a whole subsection for matte. So here are all the mask tools. And one interesting thing here is you see we have all these keyers. Blender has a full keying set. So for green screen, blue screen, luminance key, chroma key, and so on. So you really can do these kind of works also here inside of Blender. What we want to do is we want to take a look now into different mask operations. So let's start with a simple box mask. I add it here, set the viewer onto it, and this here's the result. And now comes the interesting point. If you press the N key, you see this mask here delivers its output full HD. Why? Because of your render settings here. So this here, if it's open, it always defines its size here in the project settings. But if you take a look here into now the values here, let's get rid here of all these, you will see that these values are relative. And this is really important. You see, this is the center where the box is started to be generated. And this is relative 50% because I said to you that I really often work with proxies, for example, 50% or so. And this here is so pixel independent. It always works, and you can later change here the percentage of your plate. So this is important. So I can now move here if I like this box here around. Okay, Shift H to also get rid of that here. What you also can do is now you can change here the size of the box. I hold down Shift so that it's a little bit slower in working. You also can rotate the whole thing here. I think it's really clear how that here works. But what's maybe interesting is how to combine masks. So let's add under matte another kind of mask. Let's take ellipse mask. And this ellipse mask here, I want to hook up. Okay, I H this again. And what you can do now is you can combine masks. So for this, you take the second mask and you bring it into the stream of the first mask here. And now you see this mask has a mask. This is now the output. And now for the ellipse, you move now this ellipse, for example, up or down. Here it is. And now we can change here, for example, the width a little bit and the height. So, and now you see that these two masks are combined, additive. And this here is the mask type. So you can now go into that here and you can now tell the system how to combine them. And I want to subtract it, for example. And that's the way you build now a whole mask setup. And you can, yes, animate also these values here. So if you press the I key, for example, you can set a keyframe here. And you have here your dope sheet open to animate this. So what if you want to have now this mask blurred out? What you can do is take a blur node. We have here under filter, blurs, different kind of ones. I take this blur node only as an example. I go in here, this is a Gaussian blur. And this time we have here a size in pixels. So I go over these two values and then I drag to the right. And you now see this is a blurred mask here. Great. Now I have to show you how to use a mask. So let's go here to this stream where the image comes in. And what I now want to do is I want to tell you how do you use a mask. For this we have two important nodes. One is an alpha convert node and one is a set alpha node. Let's talk about both nodes. So you find these nodes here under converters, I think. Yeah, alpha convert and set alpha. Here they are. And the first node here is the alpha convert node. This alpha convert node is a converter between straight alphas and premult. And this is an extremely important concept if you are a professional comper. So if you come from Nuke, for example, and you know premult and unpremult nodes, that's exactly the node you need here. So we don't need this node at the moment, because if we use set alpha, it injects it and does its magic directly. But I find it's important that you know that there's an alpha convert node. So we don't use that, but we use the set alpha. And the set alpha node now needs an image and an alpha which we want to inject. So this is our image stream where we have our backplates. So take this one first, we set it in and I set my viewer here and you see nothing happens because the alpha is 1. If you have an alpha of 1, every pixel is multiplied by 1 and it stays. So if you set this alpha to 0, you see we have now a plate which is completely transparent because every pixel is multiplied by 0, and if you multiply something by 0, it's gone. So this is something which you can use, for example, blend something in and out. So that's a nice idea here because this is changing the alpha values. But what we want to do is we want to use now our mask which we have done here. So take this RGBA value and use it here as the alpha. And now you see, we go back here, you get now this plate here stenciled out by this alpha here. Great. What if you want to invert it? Yes, exactly. You go here into the colors, take an invert node, add it here into the stream, and now you invert the whole thing. So really easy concept. So you have now seen everything which you have to use if you have a stream here with an alpha, which is an image plate. So you also can import now an image here with the image node here, and you use this as an alpha. Same way here, set alpha, and you use it. So let's get rid here of this big tree here to make a little bit more space here. What I want to do next here is to talk with you about masks which you generate through the help of the movie clip editor. So what is a movie clip editor? If you go here to masking, you see that there's a special setup here. But if you don't have that, you can click here and go to the VFX workspaces, and here's motion tracking and masking. I built this now for you. So I go here first and I say, let's take animation, whatever. And I get rid here of some windows. So dope sheet is fine. And now we have here a 3D viewer. And then you can go to the editor type here. And if you look here through the editor types, there is the movie clip editor. So this slate here. And if you click that here, you will see that this movie clip editor allows you to read in movie clips or images. And we do that. So let's go to assets here and I load, for example, this bike scene here, which is an MP4. The movie clip editor has two jobs inside of Blender. One is tracking. So you can use the movie clip editor for 2D and 3D tracking and also stabilizing because it belongs to the tracking world. And you can use it for masking. And to decide what kind of work you want to do now in this movie clip here, you have to make sure that you have the movie clip editor open here, and then you open here this menu and you decide, do you want to track or do you want to mask? In our case, we want to mask today. Make the following thing, make a control left mouse button click inside of that here, and so you now draw a mask. You can control this mask by going here to the mask menu. Here is the mask layer on which we work at the moment. And if you want to close something here, you press Option C or Alt C, so to cycle this through. And these masks here are really interesting because you can have really different interpolations. So if you press V here, you have aligned, for example, or you have auto, or whatever you want to use, free. So really different kind of control points. You have a whole right mouse button menu here for changing the types here and so on, and everything you do here, and also what you do here with the midpoint, if you grab this here, is stored here also in animation. So if you set keyframes here, you can animate this here for roto work. So this is a mask now. And you can name your masks. So if you go here, you see this is the name mask. So I name this mask, for example, shape. So nothing too fancy. If you want to have another one, make here a new mask and say, this is another shape. Okay, and then you can start again with another shape. Yeah, so these are the masks which we have now generated here. And what we now can do is we switch over here now to our comp world. And if you want to use now this mask, you can go here to inputs, and there's a mask input. Here it is. And this mask input here now, let's show it, uses here this mask which is under this menu. Here you see all your masks you have generated on the movie clip. So you say, show me my mask, or show me the shape, or another mask here. And yeah, now you can use this mask. So here they are. So set the viewer here so that you can see the outputs here. So this is the way of masking here. If you ever want to load a movie clip into that, because you worked here on the movie clip, you masked and you want to use it here, remember that in the input there's also a movie clip menu. So you have here this movie clip, and you can tell here, I want to use this bike movie here. So here it is. And then you can use this shape here again with our friend, is it alpha node? So we take this here now in, take this mask now here, and now you see you get this here now masked out with the help of our defined mask, and it's still connected, so you can go back here if you like. So this is the way you work with these kind of masks. And the next thing we want to do is, what if you want to use a mask? Let's go back here to our original one, which we've rendered from the render process. For this, there are different types of masks you can use. You have your alpha channel, but we also have added Cryptomattes. So if you go now here into our view layers, you see we've activated Cryptomattes for object and materials here. So to use them here now, we go here to the mats, and here's Cryptomatte. And what you have to do is you hook up your image here. Then we have 3 Cryptomatte inputs. They are neutral, so you have to decide, do you want to have the objects or the materials? In our case, objects, for example. So take these numbers and bring them over. Okay. And now you have 3 outputs. If you go here to image, you will see nothing at the moment. If you go to matte, same thing. Why? Because first you have to pick your matte, and for this we have to show the pick mode here. And because we've used here the objects, you see in the pick the objects colored here. And now you can use here your add eyedropper, and we say we want to have, for example, this object here. This hash here now is added, and if you now go to the matte, you see the matte for this object, and if you go to image, you see it's pre-multed now out, so you have it separate. So now you have your mask from the Cryptomatte world. Really easy, really cool. There are different kind of other maskings. So if you go here, one of these is, for example, here the ID mask. If you go here, you see that you can use an ID here. What is an ID? For this, we need a new pass here. Let's do one. Let's go first into the 3D world. And what I want to do is I want to split these 2 objects here. So for this, I take this object here, and if you go here to the object properties, under relations, you have here a pass index, and you can number now this object. This object is, for example, now object number 11, and this object here is object number 12. So if you want to do the same for the material, so you can go here to the material of an object or the material which is linked to different objects. And then you go here to the settings here, and there's also a pass index for these. So you can name now this material here with a number. And to get now these numbers, we go back here to the view layer properties. And if you look here through, we have two indices, one for the objects and one for the materials. And we only want to use the objects, so tick this. And now I go back into the compositing and re-render. That's the whole thing. And while it's rendering, if you now take a look here, you now see the indices for the objects. So index OB for object. You can't use them by yourself. You see, it looks only white. You only know that these here have something going on. But if you want to use them now, you use a special ID mask node. So let's go out here. Now we should see here's the index, and now we can use our ID mask here, hook it up here, here it is, and now you tell with the index number which one you want to have. I want to have number 11. And now you see that, and if you want to have an anti-aliased result, tick this here. So that's the way of using masks directly from the render. So Cryptomatte is a great way. It works absolutely fine. ID mask also works. It depends what you want to have. So we are now at the end of the tutorial, and I hope it helped you to understand a little bit more about the workflows inside of the Blender 2.9 Compositor and compare it to your work in Nuke or in Fusion or maybe also in After Effects. If you have more questions, please write them down in the comments. I will be happy to help, and I plan many more tutorials about these workflows, also about different nodes inside of the Compositor, motion tracking and so on. So please let me know what you're interested in, and if you like this kind of videos, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. My name is Helge from Pixeltrain. Have fun with Blender. See you next time.